Once upon a time, I stumbled upon the most haunting experience of my life, a job in the mortuary of a hospital in New York City. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to join my loyal subscribers. So let's dive into this tale. I had a background in the medical field, but due to a lack of resources and income, I left my studies and set my sights on finding a job in New York. My financial situation was in shambles, and I was desperate. Then one day, a friend came to me with an offer. He mentioned a job at a hospital that paid well and even included a one-bedroom apartment, which meant I wouldn't have to worry about rent. My spirits lifted immediately, but I could tell my friend wasn't thrilled with the idea. The job might be disturbing, he warned, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to handle it. Curious yet determined, I insisted on hearing more, and he finally shared the details. The job was in the mortuary. They needed an assistant to help with postmortems. I felt a wave of disappointment, but quickly reminded myself of my financial struggles. I convinced myself that this was my opportunity for a fresh start. Seeing my willingness, my friend looked shocked. After all, he knew I was a bit of a coward. The next day, I arrived at the hospital. It was massive, but it had an eerie, old feel to it. At the reception desk, a nurse directed me to a senior doctor's office. The doctor met me immediately and explained the job. "Your work isn't too complicated," he assured me. "You'll assist in postmortems, but you won't have to make any incisions yourself." After that, he led me to the mortuary. We walked through a long corridor to reach it. It was the last room at the end. When he opened the door, I was surprised to see it was a vast hall, not a small room. In the center was a large metal table surrounded by several freezer cabinets for storing bodies. There were beds lined up, and on 3 of them lay corpses, each covered in a white sheet. I noticed a washroom to the left, and just as I was taking it all in, another doctor emerged, drying his hands with a towel. The senior doctor introduced him as Dr. Joe. Together, the doctors gave me a quick tour of the mortuary and asked a few questions to gauge my knowledge. I got the job, but was told I'd need to work well for a week to secure it permanently. Once confirmed, the apartment keys would be mine. Determined to prove myself, I worked diligently. Over the next week, I got used to handling the bodies, disinfecting instruments, taking photos and fingerprints, and finally packing the bodies in bags and placing them in the freezer cabinets. The initial unease faded, and Dr. Joe and I became friends. One day, I arrived at work to find a few police officers outside the mortuary. I overheard one of them saying they needed a post-mortem report urgently. To my dismay, Dr. Joe wasn't there. As I entered the mortuary, heart pounding, I saw a covered body on one of the beds. Taking a deep breath, I pulled back the sheet to reveal a young girl with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. Her eyes and mouth were open, and she seemed to be staring right at me. A chill ran down my spine, but I steadied myself. Just then I heard footsteps behind me and quickly covered her face again. "It was a male nurse. The senior doctor wants to see you," he said. After meeting the senior doctor, I returned to the mortuary and felt a wave of unease wash over me. Entering the room, I noticed the covering on the girl's face had fallen to the floor. I was sure I'd placed it securely, ignoring the creeping dread. I chalked it up to carelessness and continued with my work. The girl's details were written on a note attached to the body, and I froze as I read them. It listed her eye color as dark brown, yet they had clearly been blue when I saw her. I shook it off and took a closer look at the body. She wore a knee-length frock, and I noticed deep cuts on her wrists and ankles, evidence of a tragic loss of blood. In her mouth, I found a piece of paper in a language I couldn't read. I placed it in an envelope for the police. Just as I started taking her fingerprints, the power went out. The backup lights kicked in instantly, casting the room in a dim red glow. It was eerie. When I turned back to the girl, I gasped. Her body had shifted, now lying on her side, one hand dangling off the bed as if reaching toward me. Panicked, I was ready to flee, but I steeled myself, reminding myself of my financial need for this job. Suddenly, the main lights came back on. I finished my work, sealed her body in a bag, and placed her in the freezer. I was still shaken when I heard a soft thud behind me. The cabinet door had swung open. I was sure I had closed it tightly. Hesitating, I opened the cabinet and found her body turned on its side again. Trembling, I adjusted her position and shut the cabinet. At that moment, I felt a cold breath close to my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin as all the freezer doors creaked open, only to slam shut when I blinked. Just then, some staff arrived with another body, accompanied by a police officer, who mentioned they had found the girl's body in a forest and that she wasn't from America. After he left, I gathered my nerves and went back to work. I had just finished with the new body when I heard the faint sound of a woman weeping. My heart raced, but before I could process it, the power went out again, and the red emergency lights came on. The sound of weeping grew louder. Stepping into the shadows of the room, I froze. There was a woman sitting on the floor, her long hair hiding her face. When she finally looked up, her eyes were solid black, void of any whites. She let out an ear-piercing scream, and everything went dark. When I came to, Dr. Joe was standing over me, saying I had fainted from exhaustion. I told him everything, every horrifying detail. He listened intently. Tan was particularly alarmed when I mentioned the piece of paper. When I handed it to him, he paled and sat down, explaining that it was a paper used in Jewish exorcisms to trap an entity within a body. Removing it would release the spirit, and by pulling it from her mouth, I had set it free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more spine-chilling tales.